hustlers, road players, tournament champions. Hear the stories, get their advice, learn about their lives. Our host, Joey Ryan, brings you an inside look at the professional pool player. You're listening to the Pool Player Podcast, brought to you by Pool Scene 365.
Hey, welcome to Pool Player Podcast, brought to you by Pool Scene 365. I'm your host, Joey Ryan, and if you're enjoying this content, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, like it, share it. Also provide some comments on the videos. That way we can help make this thing better. In fact, some of the comments I received early on said, hey, let's get some industry folks on. And so I did that. And today we have with us a couple of great guests. They're the folks who invented FargoRate. And so today we have Mike Page and Steve Ernst with us. How you doing, guys?
Doing great, Joey.
Yeah, just great.
Awesome. Well, I don't know for sure, but I assume that you guys both play pool. Is that correct?
You know, I used to play a little bit. It seems like it's been a while.
Yeah, same for me. Mike is about twice as good as I am, as our Fargo ratings would indicate. But I am, when we talk about Fargo ratings, we talk about the distribution of ratings, right? So everybody remembers the bell curve from any stats class they have. I am the dead middle of that bell curve. I am the average player. Mike is better than that.
Yeah, we're kind of in the thick of things. We're in the, I'm a little over 600. Steve was 500-ish a couple of years ago, and now he's probably 530 or 540 or so, and
might be generous.
He's got a nice ramp up, and I'm at best staying the same.
That's awesome. So tell me, you guys must have a background in math and statistics. Like, which one of you is the mad scientist here, and which one is more of like the salesperson?
Well, you're going to be disappointed here that I don't think we have a good salesperson.
Two mad scientists.
We have two mad scientists, exactly.
Well, actually, Mike, I've seen a lot of your posts online, and you do a really good job. Really, you guys take some criticism from time to time from people who don't really understand it or maybe don't believe in it yet. And I think you do a great job of keeping a level head and just explaining what you guys are trying to do and, how it's good for the game. So I want to dive into some of that. But before I do, can you take me back to the beginning? Like, I have this image in my head that you guys were at a pool room somewhere and you were really frustrated with the rating system and you started scribbling on a napkin, carry the 2, square root of this, boom, boom, you have FargoRate. Is that any way how it happened?
Stretch that out over about a year and a half and you're closer. So I will start with part of it. Is it did happen in a pool room. But only a portion of it. So Mike, he didn't really go into his background previously, and I'll let him do that. But Mike had devised this sort of approach to calculating pool ratings on a global scale. Years ago, he anticipated this coming years and years ago, and had written a white paper on it. And I moved to the Fargo area. Mike opened his pool hall. I got to know Mike, and I came across his white paper, and over a series of months, pestered him. So my background is, at the time, I was a programmer for Microsoft and had been for years. And I'm trying to convince Mike that this is too valuable to not give to the pool community, right? To not take it to a large scale. And it took a long time, but I convinced him, I think. So I'll let Mike talk about how the actual origins of the math came about.
And before I do that, I'll just point out that Steve's not your average guy to have in the pool room. So he is a guy that at the time had already created an app where you take a photograph of a pool table. It does recognition of the balls, of their color and their positions, and figures out stuff about how to run the balls out and so forth. He also right now if he's in his basement and he misses a shot, he just like claps his hands, and then something above just like projects where the balls were a few seconds ago. So he resets them up. I mean, you know, so
yeah, my auto rewind projector.
That's awesome. I love that.
And he was also a quite senior developer for Microsoft. One of the guys that actually worked on the Excel project.
Wow.
And so, but anyway, yeah, I worked on this rating stuff quite a long time ago, and did some analysis of some early pro stuff. And of course, getting data is such a big deal. And, you know, once I had a pool room, you could sort of get a lot of data, or our own data, and started collecting other data. And once Steve was excited to take this to the next level, it was just kind of really a no-brainer. And it's been, you know, 5 years of 60 hours a week. And it's been a lot of fun.
So what year did you guys start working on this?
We actually formed as a company in January of 2015. I don't remember how much we've been working before that.
Yeah, I don't 12 to 18 months, something like that, I think.
So without revealing your proprietary secret sauce, can you share in general terms how the system works?
Sure. So there is the kind of the easy way to talk about it and the more complicated way to talk about it, which of course is the more accurate way. But the general principle comes from a system called the ELO system. And it was originally developed to rate chess players. And Mike often brings up the movie Social Network, where they actually write it on the dorm room window when they're doing their face mash thing. Is there's nothing tricky about ELO. You look at two people's ratings and a match is played, and it tells you based on the outcome of that match how much somebody moves up and how much the other person moves down, and that's it. And that's the way chess has done it for years. But there's a fundamental flaw in the way that chess does it, and they recognize it, but they're willing to live with it. And the fundamental flaw is if Mike and I were to play a match, and Mike is rated 200 points higher than me, and if we were purely using ELO and I win, I have beat my expectation. I am not supposed to beat Mike. Occasionally I will, right? Occasionally I'm having a great day, or Mike's having a bad day, and I'll beat my expectation, or maybe I've been getting better, whatever the case is. But if I win, if I've exceeded my expectation, my rating will go up a little bit and Mike's rating will go down a little bit. And that's the end of the game, right? In ELO. Well, the problem there is I may actually be like, have found a new speed, right? I am actually better. What we do is, instead of it just affecting Mike's game and affecting my game, is it affects everybody's game. Mm-hmm. So if you picture the FargoRate system as a whole bunch of dots that are all players, and a whole bunch of lines that connect those dots, those are all matches. And some of the lines are a little thicker and stronger, and some of them are not quite so thick and strong. And the thickness of those lines has to do with how robust are the two players involved, how many games do they have in the system, things like that, and how many games have been played between these players. They form the connections between all these players. When a new match comes into FargoRate, and it's like a drop of water coming into the pool, it ripples across the entire, we call it the graph. That's the mathematical term for all these connections. It ripples across this entire graph. Every player's rating will move. It could be a millionth of a decimal point, but every additional piece of information, every new game that comes into FargoRate gives us an opportunity to reevaluate everyone's Fargo rating. So the real secret sauce, if you will, is that. It's the process of reevaluating on a daily basis what is the optimal, the best rating that we can put on every single player in the system that makes all of those games that were played, they're real games of pool with real outcomes, make the most statistical sense. So if you picture this whole thing as a mountain, and we're climbing up this mountain, at the very top of this mountain is a number, a Fargo rating that we can put on every single person. We can then say, if these were the real Fargo ratings for these people, what are the odds that these matches were played would turn out the way that they did? And what we're trying to do is to get that number as high as possible to make the most statistical sense that this is right. We're trying to climb this mountain and get to the very top where there's no better rating that we can put on anybody given the information we have now. So that's really the secret sauce, is start with ELO as the basis and expand out to do the optimization for everybody every day.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. I love that. So I also love when people have a big vision. I used to work for this company. We were into the, data analytics and law enforcement data sharing. And believe it or not, there's like 18,000 police departments and sheriff's office throughout the country, and they don't share data. So if you get arrested, it goes in the FBI system. But if you don't get arrested, you could literally be a suspect for a robbery in 15 jurisdictions, and they'll never know about it. Like each one will never know about the other agency's, thing. So the CEO of this company had this big vision. He says, I want a nationwide layer of crime from every agency. And there's with 18,000, you can imagine what a challenge that would be. But I loved it. It inspired me every day to kind of go for this and go after this. And so, you guys have, I believe, this vision to take this to, all 50 states, maybe international, whatever it is. Did you think when you started out that it would become this widely accepted in such a short period of time? It's really only been 5 years?
Yep.
Well, I think we did. We tend to think globally. We work with data a lot, and we think about big picture things. And while we recognize that most pool is played locally, we see bigger connections between what goes on in the pool world, and we recognize that it, much like the law enforcement thing that you're talking about, the lack of the ability for pool to grow is about the way those local areas don't connect properly with one another. And we see rating pool players as being a big impediment to growing pool and coordinating the pool world throughout the country in the United States, the continent, and the world. And so we think that we can have a big impact there.
Yeah. So I know you guys probably don't get any complaints at all about your systems, but let's just say hypothetically you did. What would be the biggest complaint that you guys receive?
So Mike may have a different answer, but the biggest one that I get all the time is your system can't possibly be right because it doesn't have all of my games, right? For example, you didn't take in this tournament, so it can't be accurate. Or you didn't take in that tournament, so it can't be accurate. And it turns out that it can. And in some cases, it can be more accurate based on if you had an anomalous performance somewhere, and that was the one that happened to be excluded, but we won't talk about that. You, and we won't drag this out to a long story, but you as a player, and you being any player that's out there, have a Fargo rating. And all that our math tries to do is to figure out what that Fargo rating is. And the more data that we have that comes in, the closer we can get to what that actual real Fargo rating is. But for every person, and every pool player knows this, they don't play the same from day to day. Some days you play really well, some days you are not playing that well. So your rating, although I said you have a rating, it's actually kind of a range, right? And think of like the bell curve, but a little bit smaller, that you're on any given day, your Fargo rating, and I'm talking about the hypothetical internal one, right? Like your real life Fargo rating, is somewhere in that range. So the more data we have, the better we can do at calculating that, but we certainly don't need all of it. So we do get that one all the time, like has to be, horse crap because you don't have all my data, but we do not. The more we have, the better we can do, but we certainly don't need it all.
Mike, what about you? You have a
there are so many there's so many to choose from. and there are so many that we just hear so frequently that when we go into a new area, it's like people are being introduced once again, and it's like we hear the same things and try to explain them, and people eventually sort of gain a little bit more understanding, and those questions start going away, and so forth, and we move to a different place in that area, and this just happens over and over again. But it's super common to get this complaint that my rating shouldn't go up unless I beat better players. People think they should have to beat better players for their rating to go up. Well, that's not true. People think that their rating is not going to be right if they only play in a weak league or a weak area or something like that. They think their rating is going to be, messed up. It's not going to match, what they would see if they went to the big city. People think that ratings determined from league or small tournament or something is not going to, be right compared to games that you get in a big tournament that matters more or for more money. And that's just not true. And even if people in pool league or the small tournament, drink more, socialize more, don't care as much, all these kinds of things. These things don't make that much a difference. It's like if you take your car and go drive it through the muddy river. You've got a muddy car, and you can wash it. You can get it cleaner, even if you're cleaning it with some slightly dirty water. You can, right. And it's a lot that way with with ratings, and so we've kind of figured a lot of this stuff out, and people, when they get accustomed to the ratings, they sort of start realizing these things. But when somebody sees what they think is an issue, we're a little struck at how strongly they feel these objections, but we explain them, and they tend to go away. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. It sounds like, listening to what you said early on, Mike, that there might be kind of an evolution of, the complaints as FargoRate gets accepted in an area, right? So initially there's, a certain level of complaints, and then people are like, oh, okay, it's kind of, it's flushing out and things are working. And then you maybe get a different level of complaints. Well, one complaint that I hear, quite a bit, usually right after the BCA tournament, is, and I just had Ozzie Reynolds on, and we talked about, the unestablished players and why unestablished players are allowed in his events. And he's like, well, look, to get up to 200 games, you might play 3 whole sessions and not get up to 200 games playing in my league. And I can't tell you can't come play in our tournament now when you played in my league for 3 sessions. And it was a very good point. And so can you clear up like this whole unestablished, established, the magic 200 game mark and the starter ratings and what all that's about? Can you talk for a few minutes about that?
Sure. So the the whole established player thing and starter ratings and provisional things all stems from one certain desire, which I'll talk about in a second. But before we can talk about any of that, we have to talk about robustness and really what it means and why it's there. So robustness is just a word that we jumped on early on when we were doing this that really stands for just number of games, individual racks of pool that you have in our system. And what that does, it acts as it does a number of things, but the predominant thing it does is act as a shock absorber for your rating. So if you picture a car driving over a speed bump that has no shocks in it at all or very bad shocks, that thing bounces halfway down the street, right? If you have really good shocks, it dampens out that vibration and you get little movement. So robustness really acts like that for someone's rating early on. So when, and to some extent, starter ratings as well, which I'll talk about, but as someone gets more and more games in the system, say 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 games in the system, we start to become very comfortable in our rating on this player. We have a really, really, really good idea of how this player plays. We have a ton of information on that particular player. And consequently, that forms a belief that we have, or the math has, about how that player plays. And as new data comes in, the higher that robustness is, the more new data we need to change our minds, right? Because they have a very high robustness. If you go to the opposite end and you now have a player with no games or very few games, say 5, 10 games, something like that, we do not have a strong opinion of how that player plays. So as more games comes in, their rating can fluctuate considerably. All of the car with really bad shocks, right? It's going to bounce around considerably. So that's where the starter rating concept comes in. The starter rating is a shock absorber, if you will, for that person's rating. It helps dampen down. It's when we have, or your league operator or tournament director has an idea of how this person plays, or it could be, CSI can do it for their league members. When we have an idea of how that person plays, it helps to dampen down those oscillations until they get to this magic number of 200, at which point we do not consider the starter rating at all anymore. It goes away. It's no longer used as part of the calculation. So the starter rating is there to dampen down the oscillations. So then the next question is, well, why 200? And as I had mentioned earlier, we talk about every person has a in their chest, a Fargo rating. This is how I play. This is the level I play at. And as we get more data, we can get a closer and closer approximation to what that real number is. Well, think of that as the bell curve again, right? And more data allows us to squish in that bell curve and get closer and closer and closer. Well, at 200 games, we can get that bell curve squished in pretty good to a point that we consider saying someone has a Fargo rating. We've gotten confident enough in the range of values that bell curve says to say you have a Fargo rating. Prior to that, we don't even use the term that the person has a Fargo rating. They have a provisional rating or an estimate of a rating. I think golf uses provisional handicaps and such. You have a provisional rating, but until you get to 200, you really don't have an official Fargo rating. So it all has to do with the confidence that we have in that rating. At 200, our confidence is high enough that we will issue a Fargo rating.
As a follow-up to that question, I've seen some tournaments that have implemented their own number above 200, where they say, well, if you're coming from out of state, you have to have 500 games in. Is that necessary?
Well, it's as the number of games gets bigger, like Steve said, the bell curve of how you actually play, gets narrower. We get more and more confident in how you play. So to some extent, I understand that kind of thinking. But people should recognize that the accuracy of the rating gets better pretty slowly with the number of games. So when a person has 200 games in the system, so we just barely are willing to say you're rated. When they have 200 games in the system, what we can do is look at a whole bunch of people and we can say, there's a 2/3 chance that rating is right within about 20 points. Okay, we can look at that. And so if we took 200 of Joey Ryan's games, just snap 200 out of the middle of, or took every second match of your last bunch of tournaments, 200 games, and did a rating just based upon those, there's about a 2/3 chance that the rating that came from those would be within 20 points of what your actual rating is. So that's about how good the 200 game rating is. To get that down to within 10 points, you'd have to go to 800 games. So from 200 to 800, you have to go 4 times as many games. So it's pretty slow. And then to get it to 5 points, you'd have to go to 3,200 games, factor of 4 again. So it doesn't narrow that quickly. And I don't know, some of the reasons that people are looking for 500 games for out of town players and things like that are when people are doing these high entry X and under tournaments. Like here's a 550 and under $1,000 entry tournament. And we're actually not a fan of those tournaments. And the reason we're not a fan of those tournaments is there's a ridiculous amount of money in them. And if you announce that 6 months from now, there's going to be a 550 and under tournament that's going to have a huge prize, you've suddenly put the incentives on their head. You've suddenly made 545 a fundamentally different rating than 555 in a way that it isn't normally. Yeah. And we don't think that's a good thing. So what we think is best practice is to not do these super high entry, X and under tournaments. A little bit higher entry is fine, but to just say when somebody has 200 games, if they have an established rating, let them play by the established rating. Let them play, and not do the 500 game business.
Yeah. So I recently commentated a match at Griff's for the $1,000 entry where the winner got over $20,000. And I thought back, and I've had some pretty good success in my pool career, if you call it that. And, never seen that kind of money come my way. And I'm like, doggone it. It's like 580 and under and, walking out with $20,000. But it was a great event, but I could see your point. Having that such high entry fee and such high payouts provides that incentive where somebody could say, you know what, I'm going to dog it for 6 months or 8 months and try to sneak in at one of these tournaments. Whereas, the thing I love about what you guys are doing with FargoRate is if you are going to sandbag, you're going to lose a lot. You're going to have to just lose and lose and lose and lose. And then you're going to make a big score and then you're going to go up and then you're not going to be able to do that again. So it's kind of
every game makes the shock absorber stronger in your car. Right. So every game, if you were, following your analogy or your story there, every game that you dogged is making your shock absorber stronger. So when you do go out and snap off that big win, greatly exceed your expectation, you are in a worse off position than you were when you started.
Yeah. So I live here in Arizona and, I joke around sometimes and I say in Arizona, in Fargo, we trust, so if anybody comes to town, and they have an established Fargo rating, they get played. Like somebody's gonna, oh, you're a 575, great. Let me call around, and we got 10 565s to 585s that are ready to go. And that's kind of cool. What other states have implemented Fargo, kind of like Arizona, where it's like a really big thing?
So I know Mike has the answer to this, but I'm going to just expound for a second on something that you had mentioned earlier. And you had said it's almost like there's this set of steps that different geographical areas go through as they're taking up Fargo ratings. And you couldn't be more right. And Mike and I talk about this all the time, is these phases that these different areas go through. And so the list that Mike is about to say are going to be the areas that have went through those phases, and they're at the area that Arizona is. And it's not only acceptance, but one of embracing and truly realizing its power for the situations, like you had just said, for matching up with completely unknown individuals.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to think of what are some of the states that are kind of in that place that Arizona is. Oklahoma for sure, Wisconsin for sure, North Dakota. I think in the Pacific Northwest, Washington and Oregon, and then a bunch of other states to a lesser extent, or certain parts of the state, certain parts of New England, certain parts of Florida, certain parts of Texas, in Canada, in the Atlantic provinces. I'd say that's true. In actually, a bunch of Canada, in Alberta, some in British Columbia. Internationally, ratings are pretty darn strong in Sweden. There's a lot of information in Norway, Netherlands, a lot in Australia, or quite a bit in Australia, New Zealand. But I think these places that like you said, like in Arizona, I think what a lot of people are surprised by is how much more action there is when Fargo ratings are fully accepted, because people's gut reaction is, oh my God, you're going to kill action, and they think, well, because they think action depends upon everybody just sort of having this fantasy that they can beat the other people, and that's why they play, right? And the reality is, people having no knowledge is why they don't play. So if you're a 600 level player, and let's say you're a 600 level player and you live in Arizona, you play your local tournaments. So let's say in the old days you were in Arizona, 8, maybe you're going to move to a 9, whatever. And you're a pretty serious player. Pool's a big part of your life. If you went to Mississippi or Tennessee for work, you would want to gamble. You'd want to match up. You'd want to play somebody. But if you go into a pool room and say, I want to gamble, you're not going to do very well. With Fargo ratings, that person is going to go to Tennessee or they're going to go to Mississippi, and they're going to match up. They're going to meet people. They're going to have a good time. They're going to interact. They're going to maybe win and maybe lose, but they can play a whole bunch. They can play a bunch of people, and it's a different kind of world like that. So all kinds of people that were not matching up before, or were being very careful, are actually matching up now. And we see it, people coming through our area, people come through and they have a rating and they get played, and they get played, our locals. So if someone who's a 650 comes through town, the local 620s are all over them. They want to play. People don't mind, not having the advantage in a match. They don't mind, stepping up. They just don't want to be stupid about it. They don't want to, get in a match that they just have no business playing.
Yeah, they don't want to play a 750, but they'll
Yeah,
play
exactly.
650. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, so yeah, so what I kind of gather from what you said, Mike, is that the action can actually increase and the fair gambling can increase, but what's going to decrease is the hustling, right? Is the sneak in, dress in a carpenter's outfit, can't play pool a lick, and then somebody wants to play for 100 a game and they just drill you, And so that resonates with me because, I'm a pretty decent player and I travel for work to 13 states for my day job. And I'll pop into a pool room and it's like you said, before FargoRate, it's like, let me make a phone call. If somebody makes a phone call and it takes the person about an hour and a half, 2 hours to get there, I know I'm in trouble. I could probably beat most people that are there at the time, usually. But when they make that phone call, it's like, but now, with FargoRate, it's a little bit easier to find a match that's fair. And I think that's what a lot of people want. So what states do you need more representation? And, if they're listening, because so far this has been pretty successful. I got a lot of people listening. Go ahead and give them your elevator pitch for why they should encourage their tournament directors and their league operators to participate.
Well, so there's certain states that are kind of particularly frustrating to me. I'll take Ohio as an example. When I used to travel around, I remember, I went to Dayton, Ohio, 25 years ago. I went to, Airway Billiards, Dayton. Great place. They had a Monday night tournament. It probably had 30 or 40 people in it. It was like a race to 3, no handicaps. People would drive up from Cincinnati, and it was just a 9-ball tournament. It was like $6 to get in. I played. I mean, there was people like Jason Miller, Gary Spaeth was still alive, and it was a great tournament. And it had weak players, middle of the road players, world class players. And it was fantastic. And I remember I just loved playing in that tournament. And then afterwards, I didn't really play one pocket at the time. So I was playing one pocket for a couple of dollars a game and somebody was teaching me. And then I went to the bar and I was watching one pocket on the screen and was talking about the player on it was Steve Cook was playing on the Accustat tape. And the guy sitting next to me at the bar was talking about the match with me. And then he said, well, I played it like this. And then I realized that it was the Cookie Monster, Steve Cook himself talking to me. And, so it was a really cool place. And so I had all these really good feelings about pool in Ohio. I mean, it seemed great. But now, it's like they just don't want to embrace, moving pool forward, and they want to kind of keep things secret and not do things publicly, and I just don't get it, and I don't understand, so what I would like to say is look at Oklahoma, look at Arizona, and look at how many tournaments they are running each week right now, with Fargo ratings going in full force. Look at Oklahoma City. I mean, Oklahoma City, I don't know if it has 1 million people or something. Oklahoma has 4 or 5 million people. I mean, we take 40 tournaments a week in from Oklahoma. 40 plus. Yep. So yeah. The number of tournaments available is just crazy. The number of people playing in pool tournaments, joining leagues, playing is just higher now than it's ever been. Arizona, I mean, Scott Frost made that comment that he was kind of skeptical about FargoRate when it first came out. But he said, that he's just completely turned, and it said it's just really bringing players out. And when it comes down to it, getting more players out and playing is the key. to everything that we want to do, we in the pool community.
Yeah.
And I think that people in states like Ohio should just look at that. You know, instead of trying to specifically understand what it is or what it isn't, they should just look at that and say there must be something there. There must be a reason that works.
Yeah, I can tell you that there's like pre-COVID, there were, I don't know, 20, 30 tournaments a week, really, it seemed like in Arizona at a number of different places and a number of different options for people. But that goes to one of the questions that I had for you guys, because I fall into, did you guys check my Fargo? I'm just curious. Do you guys like identify people as Fargos? So, hey, we're talking to Joey today. What's his Fargo? Did you do that?
Yes.
You did. I knew it. I knew you guys did that. So
I just have everybody's Fargo memorized.
So you can imagine, with where my Fargo is, sometimes I have a hard time finding an event to play in. And that's been one of my criticisms, is not the Fargo system, but how tournament directors will use that to set up their tournaments. And my argument has always been, look, I don't mind playing in a handicap tournament. And for me, I would like to, I don't play that often, but I've managed to be able to maintain a pretty high level of play by playing in maybe 1.5 tournaments a week, right? Over the last 10 years of my life. But now if there's no tournaments for me to play in, it's hard for me to do that, And so what I've said is I'm okay with handicapped. I'm okay with capped. I'm not okay with handicapped and capped. And I realize that there's some, when you have extremes involved, right? I can't go to 20 where somebody else goes to 5. I get that,
Yeah.
But what do you guys feel about that? Because I think there's a lot of players that are right where I am, where, there's 690 and unders and 680s and unders. And we're like, daggone it. How about, why not a 702 and under?
You had asked the question earlier about who was the mad scientist and who was the salesman. I'll put the salesman hat on. Is, do I have an answer for you? No. So as Mike just said, increasing pool and just getting people out there and enjoying the sport that we all love is great. But when we hear comments like that, it makes us sound like increasing pool for who, right? Just the lower level players that are just starting. We want increased pool for everybody, including the elite players. So we spent a bunch of time thinking about this. We had envisioned that there would be a bunch of like higher caliber tournaments that are out there, and everything's weird in COVID time right now. So it's difficult to even like think about these sorts of things. But we had envisioned there are all of these high level tournaments out there for players like yourself, and then some handicapped ones sprinkled in there. But the real cool thing is, if you're a tournament director, you're often left with this choice of, do I do an open tournament that can have the higher level players in there that want to play it, and forgo the lower level players, knowing that they're just going to feel like they're donating and don't want to participate? Or do I do the handicap tournament, knowing that I'm forgoing the better players that don't want to give up a whole bunch of weight to lower end players, something like that? As a tournament director, you often find yourself in this choice between those two things. So we spent a significant amount of time, and mainly Mike has spent a significant amount of time thinking about that exact problem. And we have come up with a tournament format that we call Tortola that solves that we think it does. And I'll let Mike talk about that just a little bit, or not let him talk about it just a little bit.
Yeah. Actually, I think that you've come up with a big problem, and I think you are kind of a victim of it in Arizona there, but it's kind of a big problem. And I think the first thing to note is that here we have developed FargoRate. We've been taking data in first around our area. Fargo, North Dakota is like 200,000 metro area for, more than a decade here. And I have a pool room here, and I've run over 1,000 tournaments in the last 11 years here. There's about maybe 5 out of that 1,000 tournaments that you would not have been able to play in. Out of that 1,000 tournaments, there's about 5 that Shane Van Boning or Filler would not have been able to play in. I just don't exclude people from tournaments. And I don't run these, 650 and under tournaments. I mean, I just don't do that. And so I'm not an advocate of it. And it's a problem that we've been meaning to address and kind of give people some options and suggest some options. We think it's incumbent upon pool room owners and people in the industry to make sure that there are good opportunities for high-level players, to just make sure of that. That's so important. And I would never consider not doing that. That doesn't mean that high-level players have to, make all the money or something like that. I mean, it's have a little advantage. Yeah, that's fine. But there has to be opportunities for high-level players, and we have to recognize that there's a little bit of a social contract involved. Like you're a really good player. If you go and play in a tournament, a handicap tournament or something like that, the average players, it's cool for them to be able to play you in a handicap tournament. It's cool for them to be able to learn from you, maybe get a tip, and have the opportunity. Maybe they beat you a game and they're, and that's pretty good. And you get probably an advantage, probably a financial advantage. You're probably more likely to win in whatever format it is. But part of that social contract is that you're there and helping them out. You're there and paying attention to their game and maybe giving them a tip now and again. And that's what we want. That's the way we want things. But so we want formats that work. And there's a couple of those. So Tortola is the one that Steve just mentioned. And that's a format that we've that really kind of requires some software that's close to being available, but not quite available to do it right. But that's a format where everybody enters, super wide range of ratings, and everybody starts out no handicaps. It's kind of like, so it's got an A side and a B side, and as long as you stay on the A side, no handicaps, and you play down and until you get to a certain point when there's only a small fraction of people left, that changes into a double elimination. But if you lose in the A side, you're kind of into the B side, and the B side is like a separate tournament, and the B side is fully hot handicapped. But the key is that whole B side has almost half the money in it. So everybody starts together, so everybody has the possibility of going through on the top, but half of the people, most of the people end up on the bottom and get through on the bottom. And it's kind of a cool format that everybody's going to have a chance, and we think it'll be a good way to do bigger tournaments. That when you look at events like, let's say, a Super Billiards Expo, where there's the amateur 9-ball event that has everybody from people rated 450 up to around 700. It's an amateur event, but everybody jumps into that, and single elimination, and maybe you make it a few rounds, and it's kind of an exciting thing. Everybody jumps in. If something like that was Tortola, we think it would just be a lot more fun, and it could even be twice as big. So we think that's a great format for bigger events. Another thing that we have been doing around here in Fargo for bigger events is something that we call quadrangle. So imagine you're in Arizona, imagine you're at one of the big pool rooms and everybody shows up. Imagine you can have a tournament that's say $50 entry, have everybody show up, 120 players some weekend. And let's say you've got 1,200 at it. Well, everybody shows up, they sign up, there's going to be no handicaps, but what you're going to do is divide it into 4 equal tournaments by rating. And nobody's going to know what division they're in until everybody is signed up. And then you're just going to list people by rating. And there's 4 divisions: platinum, gold, silver, and bronze by rating. So we call that a quadrangle tournament. And for weekly tournaments, you can do something like that, where you just break it into 2. And instead of, so let's say you have 32 people show up, instead of just breaking it dead in half, you don't want to do that because you're going to kind of have the same people in the same region, every week. You might want to have the cutoff point be some random place between bottom 25% and top 25%, and just kind of, do a flip, a random draw to see where that cutoff is, and then have the bottom person in the top grouping, have free entry or something like that. That'd be a fun thing to do every week. But other than that, there's no handicaps. So there's a lot of things that can be done, and we're kind of, working on thinking about, maybe putting some of these down on paper where people can.
Yeah, the big takeaway is, as I mentioned, tournament directors often think it's this hard choice between handicapped or open, and you don't have to make that decision often, right? You can combine the two and try and get the best of both worlds, where you get huge fields for the tournament, but still make it worthwhile for the lower level players.
Yeah, I really like some of those ideas, and I guess I'll make a deal with you guys that maybe in another month or two, hopefully if the country opens back up, that I'd like to try to put on one of those tournaments down here in Arizona, and we'll kind of test it out and see how it goes. I mean, I know you're working on software for is it Tortola?
Tortola, yeah.
I have a hard time with that word.
Yeah.
But I'd like to try to put one of those on down here. I might have to do a little more manual, but it sounds interesting. And if it's, something that I whine about all the time, which I do, and this might be a response to that can fix that, why not just grab the bull by the horns and set one up down here and see how it goes, and then report back to you guys and let you know, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah. And it doesn't actually require new software, but it's kind of like 3 tournaments in one sort of thing, right? So you wouldn't have just a standard bracket that you could have laying on the table that would do it, but you could easily run it without software.
Got it. Yeah. So for existing tournament directors, maybe that are out there and they're in a state, maybe where Fargo's just starting to get going, or maybe even it's going, but they don't contribute to Fargo. How do they go about doing that? Take us through that.
Well, an important thing is to get league play, getting games into FargoRate. That's kind of a big basic glue. And people think, well, a lot of those league players maybe don't play tournaments and things like that, but they ultimately are people that connect all of us. They're kind of something that connects a lot of the players in an area. So we have league software called LMS, FargoRate LMS, that gets everybody connected. So get the leagues using FargoRate LMS. It's directly connected to the FargoRate database, and get people connected. Everybody will get rated, get solid ratings faster that way, even if you're mainly interested in tournaments. And then doing tournaments, we spend a fair amount. We don't have tournament software that's connected to our database. But what we do is we work with people to gather tournament data that is shared publicly with the world. So what people need at pool rooms need to do is run tournaments and share that data publicly with the world and communicate with us and so in such a way that we can get that data. And there's a few different software packages, some of them free, some of them not free, but they're not very much, through which we can do that. And we foot all of the cost for that process, that data collection and whatnot.
And when you say, publicly available out for the world, that's likely a safeguard to ensure that the data going in is accurate. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, peer review kind of forms one of the tenets of what we do. And that means, so league data is inherently peer reviewable, right? You see the stats up there hanging on the board in the pool room or on the LMS page or wherever you're at. There's an inherent kind of peer review system that goes on there, and no team is going to let some other team get away with something, right? It's kind of built in. But tournament data, you can imagine a nefarious tournament director somewhere that has created some artificial tournament and is trying to submit it to us, but it's not publicly viewable somewhere, right? So there's no peer review process. That data would somehow kind of covertly come in. So one of our tenets is that it has to be publicly viewable. It has to be a bracket that's viewable somewhere, something like that, so that it's looked at by the players that participated and other players, to put it succinctly.
Yeah. So you guys recently came out with a new app. I love it, by the way. It's super cool.
Oh, thank you.
And also, there's a new partnership with Salotto, and I don't know much about them. So maybe there's other people out there like me. Can you explain to the viewers what the app does, how it integrates with Fargo, and how folks can go about getting started with it?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. So Salotto is run by two gentlemen out of Wyoming, Reed and Colby, two great guys. And their interest is this, it aligns perfectly with FargoRate's interest, and that's just get people playing more pool, right? Just get out and play. And oftentimes, so several times during this call here, we've talked about going to a new location and trying to find a match. And you mentioned when they make the phone call, I know I'm in trouble, sort of situation. And Salotto is there to kind of try and ease that process a little bit. When you go to a new place and you want to play a game, you can use their application to match up with somebody, to find that game. If I go to Griff's in Las Vegas there and I want to play a game, I can go and say, I'm at Griff's, I'm on table 6. And I want to play a game of 9-ball. It knows my Fargo rating, and people that are around me can say, yeah, I'll go play that. Awesome. And up to a few months ago, or a month ago, I guess, that is what Salotto has done. Well, one of the critiques that we get, or it's not a critique, it's more of just a question, is I live in X state, and there aren't any leagues around here that are using Fargo ratings. There's no tournaments. I've got to drive 3 hours to go play in a tournament. Is there any way for me to get data into FargoRate out, without having to drive the 3 hours to play? Or maybe it's, I'm playing this streamed match this weekend. It's a big marquee match, something like that. Can we put it into FargoRate? And, I mentioned that peer review was one of our tenants. We have some other tenants as well. But, the big ones are that as long as the light is shining on all the matches, nothing can hide anywhere, right? So when we talk about ne'er-do-wells and things trying to maybe sandbag their rating or subvert the system somehow, as long as we're making sure that we're properly shining the light everywhere, helps to minimize some of that. So with that possibility being out there, we have always just said, we're not going to do it. We're not going to take those matches in. They are not peer reviewable. There is a possibility for bias to enter the system if the matches are sometimes entered and sometimes not entered. Like strange things can happen that we just did not want to have happen. So we thought long and hard about that and looked at what sort of safeguards that we can put into place to make sure that doesn't happen. And then, which we'll talk about in a second. And then looked at who in the pool community aligns with what we're doing and we can trust to kind of be that front end with the players, and Salotto kind of jumps out as that group of individuals that has the players' best interests at heart along with us. So working in conjunction with them, we tried to figure out how we can address this problem where you live in an area. You don't necessarily have to live in an area without FargoRate matches, but a lot of people do, and how they can get their matches into the system and how we can do it in a reliable, trustworthy way. We'll put it that way, that we can trust this data coming in. So we have created a number of safeguards, and Mike actually has a video coming out shortly in the Mike Page FargoRate video series that he does that talks about this in a little bit more detail on how we can do this. But the big thing is you have to make sure that players' incentives are in the right way, or in the right place, that they're incentivized to do the right thing and not the wrong thing. And then you have to put the carrots and sticks in the right places, right, is part of it. And then you also have to make sure that the data that comes in continues to meet the requirements that we have for data. So some of those requirements are the data must go in, and by data, I'm talking about a given match played in Salotto, for example. The data must go in regardless of the outcome. So when Mike and I play a match and I end up winning, I'm not supposed to win, but I do, and I know my Fargo rating is going to go up, and I decide I don't want that to go in, right? I don't put that in. Well, that's selection bias. We do not want that to happen. So we have to agree at the beginning of our match that the data is going in regardless of outcome. Tenet 1, tenet 2 must be publicly visible, right? It cannot hide under the covers. It has to be peer reviewable. Well, how does that happen if it's played on Salotto and submitted like that? Well, there is a feature in the new version of the app that you can look at any players in the system's public matches that came in via Salotto. Anybody. Could be Shane Van Boning, it could be Mike, it could be me, it could be anybody. By searching for their name, tapping the view public matches, you can see all of those matches. So there's like built-in peer review. Also within the Salotto app, you can see that information as well. So, so that tenant's there. Let's see, peer reviewable, that, why am I blanking on the third one? I talk about it all the time and it's completely escaped my mind.
They're paying something.
So that's the other thing is that there has to be, like I talked about the carrots and the sticks, and a big one is you have to have like something on the line for it. So there's a nominal cost at the beginning. It's not a huge cost, but it's not nothing either, that must be paid in order for those matches to come in. We also require a certain robustness. You have to have played enough games for us to even take the data. We have to have a pretty good idea of where you're at. And part of that is you can't just like lie and say you're some other person and start over with a zero robustness, right? To try and circumvent everything. You have to be 10 games in Salotto, both players, sorts of things and things like that. There's another point, and I can't remember what it is. It completely left my brain.
That's okay. I do that stuff all the time, Steve. I don't know. Maybe we're the same age. I don't know.
Oh, announced.
Okay.
And typically we require matches to be just not spur of the moment impromptu matches, but to be like publicly announced ahead of time. So through Salotto, you can see all the matches that are going on. And that's really a big one, is is how do you even know that this is happening?
Yeah. I like that one because, you see a match pop up and that person might be susceptible to, let's say, cheating. And so you're like, oh, well, I'm going to go down to Main Street Billiards and see if they're actually playing this match. That's
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, I like that. So guys, you've spent a lot of time with me. I really appreciate it. So I'm just going to ask a couple questions and maybe we can kind of hit them quick. And I'm totally open to doing this again one day, as you guys continue to innovate and develop, and I appreciate you being on. I'd love to maybe do this, I don't know, 6 months, 12 months later, because it seems like you guys are doing a lot of cool things, a lot of innovation. So I wanted to ask you, you guys have the partnership with CSI and, along with that, BCAPL. But is there anything that would keep the other leagues out there from being able to utilize FargoRate, like APA, VNEA, TAP? I mean, obviously they have their own systems, and I assume that's a pretty tough nut to crack. But let's say in a perfect world, could they adopt your system?
So CSI has been, when we were first starting up, we were looking for a company that, we're all about, as I've said numerous times, we're all about just making life better for pool players. And if we could just give away Fargo ratings for free and like somehow do that, we would love to do it. But the truth is, we've got a cloud full of servers that, you have to pay for, and apps to write and things like that. So we can't give it away for free, obviously. And we also require lots of data. So we like to find, as Mike will attest, we're not into this FargoRate business to make a lot of money. So we tend to try and partner with companies that have the same sort of passion for the players that we have. And very early on, we realized that CSI is that company, right? They're behind a lot of good things that are happening for pool, them and Predator and a number of other companies as well that we really believe are pushing things in the right direction. So, kind of early on, we had approached them and they were completely behind Fargo ratings. They understood Ozzie Reynolds and Mark Griffin at the time completely understood what we were trying to do, bought into that vision, and came on 100%. And we love it. So they have a unique agreement with us that allows them to use Fargo ratings within their league structures in kind of a unique way. We'll put it that way. Other leagues, say it's VNEA or APA, something like that, is able to use our league or our Fargo ratings within their leagues, but they must use LMS. And it's not just because they're APA or they're VNEA, that's how we get league data into our system. So there's nothing that would exclude them from doing it, but they must use LMS for that data.
Yeah, and they should. I mean, all leagues should be using LMS. We should have all league players everywhere using LMS. When we get to a world where everybody playing pool league is using LMS and connected by Fargo ratings, we will all be in a better place. And that's what it's built for. LMS is built to scale like that and to handle that kind of capacity, and that's what we need.
Awesome. Well, guys, I want to leave you with a recommendation for your algorithm. So, I mean,
Let's hear it.
I'm not a mathematician or anything, but I have this theory that, for better players, matching up in a 50-50 proposition is something that we're just not accustomed to. And so I find that a lot of times when it is a 50-50, according to FargoRate matchup, that the better player loses because they have more pressure on them than they would typically have playing someone that they're supposed to beat. right? And I'm kind of joking, halfway joking here, but I really do think that there's a variable there that isn't factored in, right? Because, I play somebody who's 550. Well, I know if I play them in an open even race tournament, I'm going to beat them more, I don't know, 9, 10 out of 10 times. But when it's a 50-50 proposition and it's I don't know what it would be, but it's a 7-3 race or whatever. Well, now all of a sudden I'm like, holy crap, this is terrible, And so I'm stressed, I'm shaking. It's awful.
We call that expectation anxiety.
Yeah.
If you're expected to win.
Yeah, exactly. And so that happens to me quite a bit where I'm like, normally I go into a tournament, if it's even race, I'm pretty confident. I feel like, hey, I'm going to do great.
So I have a question for you then.
Yeah.
Do you look up an opponent's Fargo rating before you play them?
I do. Yeah, I do. So I'm actually traveling this weekend to play in the Texas Open. And so I think I might have shared this in a message with you, Mike, but a bunch of friends, we kind of had this idea and we're toying around with it. And we did like a selection of players, almost like a fantasy draft for the Texas Open. And it was like right down once you got past like the top ones, because there was I'll skip this one and take Skyler instead of, Roberto Gomez or what, it's kind of like jostling around. But once you got past the household names, it was like, okay, who's the next highest Fargo? Take them right down the list. So it was kind of neat. But yeah, I do. I check it. And so I'll be checking it this weekend when I match up.
Because the surest way to get rid of the expectation anxiety is to not look.
All right. Got it. I'll try that. No, I'm half joking with you guys, but I find it, in all seriousness, when you are giving up weight, anytime you're giving up weight, it's hard, right? And when you're giving up weight in a way that it leads to a 50-50 proposition, now it's even harder because I've played in a lot of tournaments where it's a handicap tournament, but it's a 5-4 race and I know I can still handle that. I can outrun that easily, But when it's a 5-2 race and the person can run a table, well, now I'm like, oh crap, so, but guys, I just want to throw that out there, but I really appreciate your time. And I love, with the critics that are out there, I know I'll probably take some heat the same way you guys take some heat because there'll be a bunch of people that'll watch this and say, Fargo, yeah, whatever. But if you think about it, what is better than data, right? And analyzing that data and using that, right? Rather than, Billy Bob, the tournament director, who's like, no, you play a ball better than this guy. And, making these, subjective decisions about who's better than whom, right? That's where you're going to run into big problems. And we've seen that since, I started playing pool. And so, yes, there are gaps in the data right now, but the answer to that is not to throw away the system that can solve this problem. The answer is let's fill the gaps in the data and then we'll all be in a much better place. And so I'm behind what you guys are doing. I thank you for taking the time to be on the show. And if there's ever anything I can do for you guys, just let me know. Okay.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks for having us, Joey.
Awesome. Thank you guys.